Yeah, so in this particular module, we are going to be first of all discussing about the advantages of REST. Let's have the quick overview about REST before moving ahead. Also, we haven't discussed much about the REST. So all of that also we are going to be covering here in this module. So when you talk about REST, so this actually stands for Representational State Transfer. Okay. Now, in this particular one, like what is representational, how it is actually going to be there. So, all of that we are going to be covering along with discussing the advantages for the same. So, with the advantage, we are going to be seeing how this is actually coming into the picture, how we can say this is better than so. Okay. So, the first advantage of REST is lightweight. So when you talk about REST, so it is generally used, like it is generally using your JSON. So when you talk about JSON, there your data is compact. Here you are only going to be including the relevant information. It is not going to be including your extra metadata like your XML was using. So when you talk about REST, so this is going to be quite efficient and faster whenever we will have to send some data on the network. Okay. The next advantage of REST is performance. You can actually say faster performance. So when you talk about serialization and deserialization, so here also if you want any of two application to interact, here we are going to be if this is on C sharp, if this is on Python, and if they both want to interact, what we will do, this application is going to be making use of some JSON format. And when we will have to send it over the network, you cannot send it directly. You're going to be converting it out in the form, in the byte stream of your zeros and ones. And in order to do that, if you will see in the form of JSON, here we are going to be having some less amount of data. Like you cannot say less, you can say compact amount of data. We are having only relevant things. So when you are going to be performing some serialization, when you are going to be converting that data in the format which you are going to be using to send it over the network, so that is going to be lesser. Similarly, when you talk about deserialization, whenever you are going to be converting a byte stream back in the usable format, so that is also going to get quicker because here your data is compact. So when you are going to be comparing this serialization and deserialization with respect to when you are going to be comparing it, when you are going to be doing it with the help of JSON as compared to when you were doing it with the help of XML. So in the JSON, you're actually going to be having a faster communication because here you are only having some compact data. Okay. Now, the next advantage of using REST is flexibility. So when you talk about REST, here the services are more flexible because they do not depend on rigid message format. So when you talk about SOAP, that had a strict XML structure. REST, on the other side, when you talk about REST, so REST allows different formats for data exchange with like JSON being the most common one. You can also make use of other formats like your XML, Avro, and even the plain text you can use to send the data across. Okay. The other advantage of the same is ease of use. So when you talk about JSON, so it is easy to read, easy to write, and that is going to be reducing the chances of making mistakes. Also, if it is easy to read and easy to write, so it is also going to become more developer friendly. You can also go ahead and integrate it with the modern web technologies like your JavaScript, and you can also you can see that, whenever you are going to be having a communication, that is going to be very faster. So since it integrates well with a lot of modern technology, so it makes it ideal for web applications and mobile applications to make use of REST. Because here, like, when you talk about mobile phones or your web applications, so when you talk about all of those things like your mobile apps and all, so there, if you will see, we need a lot of situation when we have to send and receive data from the servers. So it becomes easy for us to make use of the same. Now the next one is statelessness. Now what it is? So when you talk about REST services, those are REST stateless. Now, what do we mean by that? It means whenever you are going to be having any request from the client to the server, that is going to be independent. The server is not going to store any information about what your previous request was, and that is how it is going to make it very easy to scale and maintain. Now, the next advantage of REST is wide adoption. So, like we discussed, JSON is very simple. It is very fast. It is very flexible. So, because of its simplicity, speed, and flexibility, REST has become the default standard for web services today. So, if we talk about any of the modern APIs, so almost all of them are making use of JSON. And if we talk about all of those modern APIs, especially like, whatever we are going to be making use for the web and mobile application, they all are built using REST. So like, the companies and developers worldwide, they are making use of RESTful APIs so that they can handle communication between your front end and back end and your data sources in your SOA. And what is SOA? That is a service oriented architecture. Now we are going to be seeing like, since I am saying that it is important, now we will also be seeing how it is actually important in your modern software architecture. So, like, initially, the moment REST was introduced in the market, people started preferring it over SOAP for building the service oriented architectures. And if you will see, today REST is the default standard. Companies all around the world, they all are using REST to connect to your front end applications, to the backend system and the databases. So today, whether you are developing a web application or the mobile application or the microservices architecture, REST APIs are the go-to solution for enabling the communication between the different systems. We are also going to be seeing like, how any application is actually going to be connected, okay, using the REST. Yeah. So like, if you talk about any of the modern application, you are basically going to be having three major components. You will be having a front end, you will be having a back end, and you will be having your data storage. So these are the three major components which any of your application is going to be having. When you talk about front end, so this is going to be the one where all the interaction is going to be there. So whenever any user is going to be using any of the application with the help of some website or mobile application, they are going to be interacting with the front end. When you talk about back end, so like, we are going to be showing some of the results on the screen, be it like, after login we will be showing the profile page or anything. So backend is that server side part of the application which is going to be handling the request, and it is also going to be processing the business logic, and it will also be seeing like how to connect with the database. Then this is your data storage. So this data storage is the one where we are going to be storing our data, where if we will be needing the need of retrieving the data, so this is from where we are going to be taking it out. So when a user is going to be interacting with the front end, they are going to be making a request. For example, you are clicking on a button, or let us say you are submitting a form. So these requests are forwarded to the backend. which may need to interact with the data source to fetch or store the data. Now to enable smooth communication between your front end, back end and data source, we are going to be making use of REST APIs. So REST APIs are going to be used at each of these levels in order to send and receive data in some standard and efficient manner. And this is also going to be allowing different parts of the system to work together seamlessly. Now we will be seeing how data flows in some RESTful architecture. So I have mentioned we are having some front end, back end and data source. So we will first of all see how the data is going to flow between your front end to back end, how it is actually going to be there. So when you talk about this, the front end is going to be making a HTTP request. Okay, and this HTTP request is going to be there either you are going to be making some get request, you are going to be making some put request, or you are going to be making some post request or delete. So these are the different requests which you can make using HTTP. So your front end is going to make a HTTP request to the backend, and how it will do with the help of a RESTful API. Now we will see how your backend is connected to your data source. So the backend may need to query a database, and this database can actually be there in the form of some SQL or NoSQL. So we are going to be making use of SQL or NoSQL so that we can retrieve or modify our data. So this data is typically returned back to the backend as your Java object or your Python dictionary or any other programming language constructs. Now we will be seeing how your backend is connected to your front end. So your front end, after it receives some requests, so what it will do, it will convert this data into a format which is suitable for your front end. Of course, at the back end, we are going to be performing some data processing. But if you will see on the front end, we would be wanting it in some format. We are going to be beautifying it. We are going to be applying a lot of styles to that. So all of those things are going to be taken care. So before sending it to the front end, we are going to be needing to update that information with some images, graphs, or some other visual elements. Now, here when we talk about REST, so we say here it stands for Representational State Transfer. Correct? Now, what does representational word here mean? So many people will remember the full form, but they may not be fully understand what is the meaning of the term representational. In REST, the word representational refers to how data is presented, how data is transformed at different stages of the request and the response cycle. When we talk about representation in the context of REST, so we mean how our data is shown or structured when it is sent between the front end, back end and the data sources. So at all of these steps in the process, the data might be represented in different formats depending upon the stage it is. So let's say you have your database, correct? So when you talk about your database, so data will be stored in some raw structures. How? You are going to be having some tables. That is how your data is going to be represented. When you talk about backend, so here your data is going to be there in the form of some JSON or XML. So we are going to be putting it in these formats before sending it to the front end. When we talk about front end, here the data is going to be presented in the form of some user interface. And let us say you're fetching some data. So it can be represented to you in the form of some text, or it can be represented to you in the form of some images, or they can also make certain charts or certain graphs in order to show, if you talk about some stock market and also they are going to be showing how the stock has performed. So all of that is actually going to be represented in the form of some charts. So when you talk about representational, so representational in REST means that data is represented in different forms depending upon where it is and how it needs to be used. And this data is also going to be allowing different systems to interact with this data efficiently. So like, how it is actually going to be working. So let's take example of some web application. In this web application, how it is actually going to be there. So you being the user here, this is going to be the front end, this is going to be the back end, this is going to be the data storage. Correct? That is how it will be there. So what exactly is going to be happening? This user is going to be interacting with the front end. Now, in order to process, like let us say this user is saying, I want to see how this stock performed in last 1 week. That request, like, let us say on the interface, he had the option of 7 days, 15 days, something like that. And he clicked on 7 days. He made a click on the front end. Now what will happen? That request will get sent to the backend. So backend is the place where the entire logic is going to be there and where we are actually going to be crunching and munching our data based upon the request we have made here. So we are going to be writing all our logic to extract last 7 days performance for that stock in this case. But in order to get the data, we are not going to be having it in the backend. Backend is only going to be having some algorithm which is going to be processing the request, right? In order to get the data, this backend is going to be making a request to the database. But it is here if you will see, this database is going to be providing it back some of the data that will go back to the backend, and this backend is going to be sending that response back to the front end. So that is how it is going to be there. So how the data representation is working here. So if you will see, like at all of these places, we are having data and we are seeing how data is represented in all of those places. So if you talk about database, so the database is actually going to be having the table. So whatever data we have, so all of that is going to be stored in some table. So which is a logical representation of your data. If you talk about backend, here, this backend is going to be interacting with the database. So data is going to get fetched and transferred as the objects. So here we are going to be having some JavaScript objects. We are also going to be having some of, like, let us say some Python classes, or we can also have some libraries here, which is going to be helping us in performing the operation. So these objects are going to be in the memory representation of the data. Now, when you talk about sending the data to the front end, so when your backend sends the data to the front end, it is typically transformed in the form of JSON, which is a compact and transportable representation of your data. So this is the most common format which we use in the REST APIs in our today's world. Now, when you talk about your front end, this is the place where we are going to be representing all our data in the form of some visuals. So here your data, your JSON data is going to be rendering some of the images, some graphs, some tables, or some other UI elements. So this is another representation of the same underlying data, but it is now in the form that is easy for the end user to understand and interact with. So if you will see, the entire communication is happening. We came to the database, it sent back the response, the backend sent the response back to the front end, and then the user is able to see, like in the front end only, he is able to see some images or some graphs or something. So that is how it is happening. So if you are going to be seeing here, the data is represented in different forms at all of these places. All right. So now, why it is actually called as representational state transfer? That is because when you talk about REST, it focuses upon the idea that your data is represented differently at each layers of the application. If you will see at the database, here we had all our data represented in the form of some tables. At the back end, we had some JavaScript object. At front end, we had some images and graphs. So if you will see, your entire data is represented differently at each of these layers. So whether it is there in the database, as an object in the memory, or as a JSON on the front end, the data is being transferred in its representational form. The state refers here to the specific condition or the data at any point in the time. So when a user is going to request some of the information, the system is going to send the current state of the data, which we are going to be transforming it into a different representation, like based upon the requirement. Sometimes we are going to be converting it in the form of JSON. Sometimes we are going to be converting it in the XML. So howsoever we want the communication, we are going to be representing it out. Here, the transfer word means moving that representation of the data from one system to the another, one layer to the another. So whether it is from the backend to the front end or from front end to the server. So we are actually going to be moving that representation. So when you talk about REST, which is your representational state transfer, so that is all about transferring the representation of your data between different systems. At each stage of this process, the data is going to look different in the different forms, sometimes in JSON, sometimes in XML or any other format. But the same data is moving across the different systems. So that is how it is going to be there. Now we are going to be taking care of some of the examples so that you can understand how it will be actually working there. So for that, we are going to be making use of some movie booking application. So like if you talk about movie booking application, so here what we will be having, we are going to be having some of the entities, and these entities we call it as noun. So anything which you can represent in the form of noun, those ones we go ahead and call as entities. Apart from that, we are going to be having some of the resources. So these resources means how you are going to be having your data, like with the help of that. So all of these things are going to be there with you, right? Now, what are the examples of your resources? So it could be something like you will be having your movie, you will be having a theater, you will be having city, and so on. So now we are just like, we will be understanding what REST is, what are the resources, how we can go ahead and perform some CRUD operations on that. So like, whenever we talk about REST, we are going to be referring to the resources. So these resources represent your data or services that your application is going to be interacting with. These resources can be anything from the user profiles, products, articles, or any other complex entity like your order, your customer record, anything. In REST, resources are the entities that are going to be representing your data or the services that we can interact with. But these resources are not some abstract data. They are the data that your application is going to be working with. And when we will be working with these resources in REST, we are going to be manipulating our data. And when we perform some manipulations on the data, that we go ahead and call as CRUD operations. So now what is CRUD? So here every letter stands for something. So here C stands for create, R stands for read, U stands for update, and D stands for delete. All right. Now, what do we mean by create? So here, if you want to add some new data to the system, you are going to be making use of create. And like, let us say you want to add some new user or some product. So that means you are creating a new user, you are creating a new product. And here with the corresponding to HTTP. So what is the HTTP method you are going to be using? So that is going to be post. The next one which we have is read. So what read is going to do, it is going to retrieve the existing data. Let us say you have some user profile, or if you have some listing of all the products, if you want to fetch all of that, you are going to be making use of read. And what is the corresponding HTTP method? So that we have get. The next one which we have is update. So update we use whenever we want to modify some existing data. Like there is some website and a user has already registered to that. Now after some time the user wants to update the email address. So in order to perform that updation, we are going to be modifying the existing data, correct? Also, what could be the another example? If you talk about any e-commerce website, so there a product is, let us say today it is costing 100 rupees. Tomorrow, if it is costing 120, so what we have done, we have changed the price of that product. And what is the corresponding HTTP operation for that? So that is your put or patch. Now the next one is delete. So if you want to remove some data from the system, if you want to delete a user, sometimes like, we'll be having option like delete the profile, something like that. Or let us say some product is there and after a while you will like, even if from the order history, if you will try to locate, you will not see any results. So what we must have done there, we have deleted the product. So for that, what is the corresponding HTTP method? That is your delete. Okay, so these are the different operations. So REST is going to be having resources. On those resources, you are going to be performing some CRUD operations. So in order to perform any CRUD operations on a resource in REST, the first thing we need is going to be the address of that resource. So it's like, if you talk about anyone in the real life, so if you want to locate some person, like, if you want to like let us say you need some help from some of your friends, so the first thing which you need is going to be the address of that person. So similarly here also we are going to be needing address of the resource. In the terms of real life, we are going to be letting the address like, this is the street name, this is the lane, this is the city, this is the state. That is how we are going to be providing, correct? When you talk about providing the address of the resource, so that is where we are going to be making use of URI. So URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier. So what does that mean? But this one is going to be doing. So the URI is going to access or manipulate the resources in a standard form. So this URI is your unique address that will identify a specific resource on the network, and like, how you are actually going to be putting the, like how you are actually going to be composing it out. So if you talk about a normal address, how do we provide? We initially provide some lane info, like firstly we provide some house number, then we provide some lane information, lane or street information, then we provide city, then we provide state, then we provide some pin code. So this is the format which we follow whenever we want to put some address, correct? In the same way, every resource in the RESTful system has a unique URI that help us locate or access and perform some operations on this. So anything and everything, when it is about running, it is going to be running on the computer only, right? And for that, we will be needing a starting point. So for a human, the starting point is going to be the earth. Like if I want to reach out to a person, what is the starting point? Like where it is actually going to be there. Like let us say I want to locate me. So firstly, I am going to be there on this earth. After that, I am going to be there in some city, in some continent, let us say Asia. After that, I'm going to be there in some country, let us say India. After that, I'm going to be there in some city, let us say Delhi. Inside Delhi, I am going to be there, like, inside Delhi, we will be having a lot of other sub locations. So, out of that, let us say I'm there in XYZ location and I'll have to provide my house number. So, let us say ABC is my house number. So, that is how I can go ahead and provide my address. All right. But when I'm going to be talking about a machine, what is going to be the starting point? The starting point is always going to be the IP address. So that is going to be the unique identifier. So if you have a resource and if you want to get the address for that, you are going to be using URI, your unique resource identifier. So the first one which is going to be there is going to be the IP address. Now we have to see what can be the second one. So if you will see in any computer, we have multiple processes for the application running and every process is tied to a port number, correct? So when let me actually take example and for that only come up with a we will come up with the location for that. So like let us say you talk about the movie booking application. Okay, here let us say I have a movie, name is ABC. Now I want to find out address of this movie. So how it will happen? So when we talk about the movie ABC, which is running on our movie booking application, so first of all, we should be knowing that on which machine this movie application is running. Then we need to understand that we will be having a port number on which this movie booking application is going to be running. So this is going to be the second part in the address. IP address is going to be your machine locator. This is going to be acting as your machine locator, right? And you're going to be having a port number. And what this port number is going to be doing, this is going to be acting as your application identifier. Okay, so just how physical addresses help us find specific places in the real world, digital addresses help us find applications running on the machine. So these digital addresses are going to be consisting of two main parts, and that is your IP address and port number. So IP address is going to be the machine locator and your port number is going to be the application identifier. So we are going to be making use of the IP address. In the digital world, an IP address, IP stands for your internet protocol. So your IP address is going to be used to identify a machine. It is going to be telling us that where your application is going to be located on the network. And just how your address is going to be telling about a building is located on a street. So for example, let us say a movie booking application is hosted on a server. Like let's take the IP for the same is something like 192.168.1.100. So this is going to be the location of the machine where we are going to be running the application on the network. Now we need to see the port number. So since IP address is helping us in locating the machine, the port number is going to be helping us in identifying the specific application which is running on that machine. A single machine can run multiple applications at the same time, like you can have take the example of the web server, database, etc. So each application is going to be listening to request which is going to be there on a different port number. This port number is going to be acting like the suite number in the building. Like you are going to be having some house number, right? So similarly, this port number is going to be acting the same. This is going to be helping us in identifying the specific application on the machine. And some of some of the port numbers are already assigned based upon some of the requirements. Like you can say these are some reserved ports. So if you talk about some port number 80, so this one is basically going to be used for your HTTP web applications. If you talk about your port number 443, so if you want to access some secure web, what you are going to be making use of HTTP. So if you want to make use of some secure web applications like your banking and all, you're going to be making use of this port number. The next one is port number 3306. So this is going to be used for the MySQL database. So if they want to make use of a port, they're going to be making use of port number 3306. For that mobile booking application, let us say that our application is running on port number 8080. All right. Now what will happen? Like I told you, you are going to be providing two things. The first one is going to be the IP address. So first you are going to go ahead and provide the IP address. The second one, you are going to go ahead and provide the port number. When you talk about the IP address, what it will do, it is going to be locating your machine, and this port number is actually going to be telling the application identifier. So for that mobile booking application, let us say this is the IP address on which we have hosted it, and for this, let us say we are using 8080 port number. So that is how we are going to be putting our information. Once we have identified the machine or the server where we are running our application, the next step is going to be specifying where our application is going to be running on that machine. So this is typically done by providing the name of the application. And next to the name, we also have to provide the version name. Now, why versioning is important? Like, if you must have seen in the softwares, like which you get on your computers or your phones, you often go through some of the updates. So these updates are going to be bringing some new features. They are also going to be fixing some bugs, or they are going to be improving the performance. So it is essential for us to keep a track of which version of the application you are using. So just think of it like some example, like, let us say you have moved to a new house. So when you will change your address, you will need to update it everywhere with your bank, with your online stores or your friends and family. And why? Because this is going to ensure that any mail, any package or any document that is going to get sent on the correct address. So similarly, when an application gets updated, whenever you are going to get a new version, it is important to update the version number in the URL. So this is going to let both the users and the developer know which version of the application is running, and they will also ensure that you are interacting with the most up-to-date version. So by providing the correct version number, you are providing a clear identification, because that is going to tell which version of the application you are using or you are interacting with. Plus, it is also going to avoid compatibility issue. So sometimes what happens, if an application is changing over the period of time, and certain cases your older versions may not work with the newer versions. So if you are providing a version number, that is going to help in preventing such of the issues. Next one is why versioning is important. This one is also going to be tracking updates. So as your application is evolving, you're going to get new versions. So when you will specify the version number, you can also track which version is live, and this will ensure that you are getting the most recent updates. So after providing this information, like your 192, 168, 100, 8080. So once you have done that, you have to provide the root URI. And how you will do, like let us say I'm using the short form for my application MBA moving booking application, and next to that I have to provide a version number. So I'm providing V1. So this is going to be the root URI that is going to help us in locating where, like which version you are going to be using. Now, the next important part is naming your resources. So when you talk about RESTful APIs, your resources are going to represent the entities which with the with which you are going to be interacting with. So when you define a resource, it is a best practice to make use of plural nouns. So this is a common standard in RESTful designs, and this helps in maintaining the consistency. Like it is not something which is going to throw error, but this is a standard and it's good to maintain it throughout. Yeah, so when I was saying that we should be using plural names, so how it should be there. So like let us say your resource is movie. So instead of using movie, how we should be using movies. If your resource is let us say a user. So in that case, you should not be using user, you should be using users. I repeat, it's not at all going to be throwing any error or anything. It is just a good naming convention. So when why we actually use plural, so when we use plural names, so that help us clarify that the resource can represent multiple items. Even though you might be working with a single movie, the resource could eventually handle multiple movies. So it is important to keep the name consistent. So how you should be actually entering, like let us say I have a movie 123. Okay, or you can how you actually want to be representing it out. So you should be doing like movies 123. So this is the correct way of writing it down. So in this case, here if you will see, we are using movies. So what movies is actually doing, so it is representing collection of all movies resources. Okay, and here 123 is the specific movie in that collection. Now we will be talking about, we have seen like how you are going to be specifying a resource like movies. So you will also have to provide some specific details about the resource. For example, if you want to access information about a particular movie, you will be appending the movie's URI, like whatever the movie is unique identifier. Here in this case, let us say it is the movie ID tagged to the URL. So like let us say this is the movie ID. Name is ABC. So if you want to append it, how you will do? You are just going to be passing it at the back. So here 123 is specifying the specific movie in the movies collection. So how you are going to be having your entire URI? So like let us say you had something like 192, 168, 1.0.100. So this is your uh, IP address. Now you will be adding your port number. So what that is going to be 8080. After that, you're going to be specifying your application name, that is the MBA here. After that, you are going to be providing the version, that is your V1. Then you are going to be naming the resource. So what is the resource here? Movie. For that, I'm going to be using plural name. So it is going to be movies. Then you are going to be providing a movie name. So like let us say ABC. So if you will see, this is the URI which we have gotten here. Okay, this is the unique resource identifier here. Now, what is URI in RESTful API? So when you talk about RESTful API, the URI is going to be the address which we are going to be using in order to access the resources. It is going to be identifying the location of the resources, and it will also allow clients to interact with them. When you create a URI for a resource, you are going to be following certain standards so that you can ensure that you are maintaining a consistency and you are also following the best practices in your API designing. In the interviews, people will be asking you about creating a RESTful API. So now I will be telling you what are the standards for creating RESTful API, and you have to keep them in your mind whenever there will be any interview. Okay. So now, we will go through some of the important standards which we are going to be taking care whenever we will be creating some RESTful APIs. So the first one which we have here is never use verbs in URI. Now, what does it mean? So a URI is actually going to be representing a resource like movie, but it is not at all going to be representing any action. And what and all are the actions like your create, update, delete, all of that. When you talk about these actions, so these actions are going to be handled by the HTTP method. That is your post, get, put, delete. But URI is not at all going to be taking care of that. So what is not correct? Like let us say you want to create movies. So you will do something like create movies. Now after that, let us say you want to update a movie. So what is not correct? If you will write something like update movies. So this is not something which is correct. But if you want to perform some updates, so how it should be there, it will be something like movies. Inside the movies, you can provide something like 1, 2, 3. So what anyone will understand that, okay, you have provided a movie ID, and on the top of this movie ID, you want to perform some of the actions. And why it is not advisable to put, that is because verbs are going to be describing the actions, and actions should be handled by HTTP methods and not by the URI. Now, the next one is always use plurals. Okay, so if you want to, if we talk about movies, so it should never be like movie. This is incorrect. How it should always be there? Movies. Why? Because whenever we are naming any resource, we should always use plural nouns, because this helps us clarify that a resource is representing a collection of items. So even if you're going to be working with a single item, you are actually providing support that it is going to be in future taking care of the other movies as well. So when you talk about RESTful, right? So RESTful is not designed only to work with one entity. It is always designed so that we can work with the collections. Now we are going to be seeing, these are the two things which you should always be taking care whenever you have to design the API. All right. Now we are going to be seeing what is REST and how does it work with HTTP. So REST is a way to design the web applications that is going to be communicating over the internet. It uses HTTP, which is your standard protocol that all the websites and applications are going to use so that they can interact with each other. They can talk to each other. It is built on the top of HTTP protocol. In REST, resources are the pieces of the data or the objects like your user, your product, your message. Each of these resources are going to have a unique URI, which is like its address on the web. In order to interact with all the resources, REST uses HTTP methods. And what and all are those HTTP methods? Your get, put, post, update. So these are the different methods which we have here. So get we are going to use whenever we want to retrieve some information. Post is going to be creating new data. Put is going to be updating the existing data, and delete we will use when we have to remove the data. So if you talk about REST, what REST is like, if you have to talk about REST in the simple language, that is like you are going to be taking resources, which is your core data. On the top of that, you are going to be applying the HTTP methods, or you go ahead and call them as actions. So If you're going to be combining these two things, you're going to be getting a REST out of it. So when we talk about REST, you should always be keeping it in your mind that you are going to be using some resources, and on the top of that, you are going to be performing some actions. Now we will be taking one example so that you can see, like, if you will be giving some scenario, how you can go ahead and design a REST API for that. So the one which I'm going to be taking care is how you are going to be creating a REST API for creating movies in a movie booking application. Now, we are going to be breaking it down in some steps so that you can understand it, like in future if you will have to do the same, how you will take care of that. So whenever we are going to be talking about creation, like here I'm saying create movie, so what we will be using for that? Post. So here we are going to be using post HTTP method. Okay. Now after this, we are going to, what is going to be the first step here? We will have to go ahead and identify the resource. So what is the resource here? That is going to be movie, because movie is something which we want to add to the system. Now the second one is we will have to define the URI for movie resource. So the URI is the address where the movie resource will be located. For the movie booking application, we will define the movie, we are going to be defining it something like movies. We are going to be taking a plural name here. So this URI is representing the collection of all movies in the system. Now we are actually going to be creating a movie. So we are going to be using a HTTP method for the creation. So to create a new movie resource, we are going to be using post HTTP method. The post method is used to send data to the server, and it is going to be creating a new resource. So when we want to add a movie, we are going to be sending a post request to the movie's URI. Now after this, we are going to be creating the request body. Here we are going to be having the JSON data. In the post request, we usually send data in the request body. For creating a movie, the data would be typically in the form of JSON. The JSON is going to be having all the details about the movie. If you talk about any movie, how the JSON could be there for that. It could be something like we are going to be having a title, which is going to be having a movie name. Okay. After this, it can have something like what is the genre of that movie. Let us say we are specifying action. Then we can specify the release date for that. So it can take any date here. All right. Now after that, we can also provide some other data like the duration. We can say this movie is of 180 minutes, something like that. Similarly, we can go ahead and provide other details, whatever the information we will be needing in order to specify our movie. Now, this JSON data is going to be sent in the request body whenever we are going to be submitting a post request. So now what we will do, we have listed down all the components, what and all we are going to be needing here. And now what we will do, we are going to be creating the URI for that. So firstly, like we said, we are going to be using a post method. Then we are going to be specifying the URI. Let us say it is something like 0.27, 0.1. Now we are going to be specifying a port number. So let us say it is 8080. Then we have to specify the application. So that is going to be something like MBA. Inside that, we are going to be telling what version of this movie booking application we are using. So let us say this is the version 1 which we are using. Inside that, the next is going to be but inside this movie booking application, which resource are we talking about? So let us say that is movies. So if you will see, this is how we have created a RESTful API whenever we will have to create a movie. Now we will see one more example. Like let us say you want to search for a movie based upon the ID. So if that is the case, how you are going to be creating an REST API for that? So firstly, you should be having the URI. So this URI is going to be having a dynamic path parameter. And what is that going to be? The ID. So how it is going to be? For the movies, you are going to be talking about ID. So when you write it like this in the curly braces, what do you actually specify that what it is? This is the placeholder, and for which you are providing a placeholder for your actual movie ID. Okay. Now here we are actually talking about search. So when you talk about search, so what we are doing, we are going to be retrieving some data, right? So what HTTP method you are going to be using here? You are going to be using get. Now after this, we will have to see, like, we are going to be actually doing it with some of the request ID. So let us say we have some ID like 123. So how you are going to be writing it down? It will be something like get. And what we are doing from the movies, I want you to get me movie with the ID number 123. Now we have to even think about the response. So if you are able to locate the movie, if the movie is found, then what you will do, you have to return the movie details. And how you will be returning it down? In the form of JSON. So here what and all things are going to be there? You are going to be providing the title, you're going to be providing the duration, release date, and so on. So all of these things, like, whatever the information we have stored for our movie, we are going to be retrieving it here. If the movie is not found, you must have seen we have one error code for that. And what is that? 404. When you are going to use when movie is not found. So for such a case, you are again going to be drafting a JSON for that. And how it will be there? You will say status. And what the status you are going to provide? That it is error. After this, you are going to be providing some message as well. What that message? Like you must have seen it on the browser. You can write it something like movie with ID 123 not found. Like, this could be any error message which you want to provide. So this is going to be the JSON which is going to be returned when you are not able to find out the movie. So how you are going to be drafting the API for that? It will be like get. You have to get. After that, you will have to provide the IP address. So from this machine, from this port number, from the movie booking application which is running on your version V1, I have some movies, and from there I want you to provide me the ID which I have provided here. Now when you provide it in this curly brace, what does it mean? You are actually taking dynamic parameters here. Okay, here you are going to be this one is actually meaning you are giving path parameters. You are giving a parameter where you can provide the value in time. So this is the RESTful API which we are going to be using for searching a movie resource. So similarly, you can go ahead and create the RESTful APIs for the other resources, for the other situations as well. I hope this must be clear to you. Do practice for the same because this is something which has been asked in the interviews as well. I hope this must be clear to you. So with this, we are ending our distributed system. Now we will be meeting in the next module. Till then, happy learning. Bye-bye.